Hey everybody, welcome back to my kitchen. One thing that I have been meaning to do and wanting to do for a while is make an egg white bread mix again. I have done this in the past after I kind of experimented with different egg white bread recipes and found ones that I really like. It made sense to put together all of the different dry ingredients, at least the ones that can go together in the beginning, all of the non-fat ingredients, and then have it just sitting in the pantry waiting for me. It just makes whipping up a loaf of bread or buns or anything like that just so much easier. So I just figured I would take you along on whipping up this egg white bread mix. And then my idea was to have the egg white bread mix as a base and then come up with however many recipes that use it. And so it's just an easy way like to mix up a huge batch, and then you have a list of, I don't know, 5, 10 different recipes that you can use the egg white bread mix for. Anything to make things simpler in the kitchen, especially when we're dealing with low carb recipes that can sometimes have a lot of ingredients and be a little bit more complicated. Just trying to like streamline the process a little bit. I want to take a quick moment to say thank you to Hiya for sponsoring today's video. Hiya is a brand of children's vitamins that my kids take. I feel really good giving these vitamins to my kids because we live in a world now where we cannot just rely on food and water for all of the minerals and the vitamins that we need. And so sometimes you can just get a peace of mind by covering all the bases with something like a multivitamin. And then on top of it being difficult to get our vitamins and minerals from food, it's also difficult to navigate the children's vitamin world because there's so many bad quality products on the market that are basically just sugar in disguise. So finding Hiya was really huge for me. They don't put all the colors and the junk and the sugar in there, and they do use the best quality forms of all the different vitamins and minerals. So it is just a great option to cover your bases. Hiya has a special deal for all of you guys. If you use my link, you can get 50% off of your first order. That just makes it a really good way to try it out and see if it's the right fit for your kids. So to get that deal, all you have to do is go to my link, hiyahealth.com/indigo. Just use that link and it'll automatically get you that 50% off of your first order. Thank you so much to Hiya for sponsoring today's video. So the last time I made this bread mix, my recipes were a little bit different. So I have made some updates to it, like including adding gelatin to the mix. That's something that I found was very helpful at one point, and that was after I made the original bread mix. So I will have the updated recipe linked down in the description so you can find that. The first thing I'm going to add is my egg white powder, and I made this mix to start with 1 kilogram of egg white powder. That is the same as 1,000 grams. And each loaf of bread takes 100 grams of egg white powder. So it's super easy when you're working with grams. This mix made with 1,000 grams of egg white powder will make 10 loaves of bread. It's also convenient if you happen to buy your egg white powder in kilogram bags, because then you can just use your entire bag in the mix. So I'm just gonna scoop out 1,000 grams here. Next ingredient is 2 tablespoons of salt. I always use Redmond real salt, but any salt will work here. Then we're gonna do 2 tablespoons of cream of tartar. And this is one of those ingredients that you can increase if you like the flavor. The cream of tartar kind of gives a like a sourdough-ish flavor. So you could increase this up to 4 or 6 tablespoons if you really like that sour taste. I'm just keeping it at the 2 tablespoons because I want this to be like the most neutral blend. And if I ever am making a loaf that I want more of that sour taste, I can always just add more at that time. Next ingredient is allulose, and I'm doing 2.5 cups. And that will come out to 1/4 cup per loaf. Allulose is something that you can reduce if you want, less allulose in your finished batch, or if allulose is very expensive where you are. It is something that can be reduced. So you could reduce this by half or even by 3/4 if you really want to cut it down. But of course, if you do reduce it, the end measurements, like when I tell you how many grams of mix it takes to make a loaf is going to change. So you'd have to like do a little bit of math and figure out exactly how much mix you would need with the lower amount of allulose. I tend to like that 1/4 cup of allulose in the bread. It makes it nice and brown. It also adds softness, and it really doesn't add sweetness. I've never noticed that, at least. It's more for texture and more for browning than anything else. Last thing I'm gonna add is 1/4 cup of gelatin, and 1/4 cup of gelatin is 40 grams. I take it back. That is not the last thing I'm adding. I actually have one add-in here that is optional. I like to add a little bit of arrowroot to my bread. And yes, arrowroot is not low carb in and of itself, but I add a small enough amount that the finished product is still very low carb. It turns out to be 2 tablespoons of arrowroot for an entire loaf of bread. So it adds less than 1 carb per slice. And to me, it's worth it for the texture, and I tend to do very well with arrowroot powder in small quantities. But like I said, it is something that you can leave out, and I will do the calculation of how much mix you use, whether you use arrowroot in there or not. And also, if you want to, you can either leave it out completely, or you could replace it with acacia fiber, bamboo fiber, psyllium husk, oat fiber, any of those fibers, you can replace it with the exact same amount and you should still get a really nice end product. It won't be exactly the same, but it will still be a very nice bread. So I am adding 160 grams of the arrowroot powder, and that, like I said, that comes out to 2 tablespoons per loaf. I am going to get this all mixed up, and I have never noticed a problem with different ingredients like settling to the bottom and getting too much salt in a loaf or something like that. I've never had that issue, but I have had some people comment saying that in order to avoid that, they actually just mix up individual, like in mason jars or different containers, individual mixes. So they just have it already like in a mason jar that they can dump into their bowl, and so they don't even have to measure out the mix when they go to bake a loaf of bread. Since I've never really noticed the issue with the ingredient separating, I don't do that, but that is another option if that seems appealing to you. I am going to use one of these pop containers to store my egg white bread mix in. I actually was storing my egg white powder in this, so that's why it looks dirty. But since I've been using up my giant stash of Now brand egg white powder, it doesn't make sense to take the powder out of this giant jug and put it into here, so I haven't been using this, so this will work out great. I'm just going to try to carefully get this in here without creating any kind of like mushroom clouds of egg white bread mix. And I gotta make a label here. There we go, all ready to go. 10 loaves of bread, all prepped. So I am going to go ahead and make a loaf of probably my simplest bread recipe using this egg white bread mix. It's one with butter powder. It also has a little bit of yolk powder that gives great flavor, adds some fat, and a really, really good texture. That's been like the key to getting a good texture on this bread. So I'm going to go ahead and get my pan ready. I always use parchment paper. It just makes it easy. And the technique I use is using 2 pieces of parchment paper. I do have a little video where I go into detail about this. I will link that up in the cards. But it just makes the parchment paper lie down flatter more easily. So we do one in the long way and another the opposite way, and it kind of makes an X or a T. I'm also going to go preheat my oven to 325. So if you use the arrowroot powder in the mix or a fiber in place of it, The amount of mix you need for one loaf is 161 grams. If you left out the arrowroot and didn't replace it with anything, you'll need 145 grams. And I do always recommend using a kitchen scale for this. Trying to measure it out in cups is just inherently flawed. And these ingredients are just too expensive to be playing around like that. And scales are very, very cheap. You can get a kitchen scale on Amazon for like 15 bucks. And so I just definitely recommend if you're wanting to make 10 loaves of bread and you're mixing up a whole, batch of the mix, just invest that little bit more money in a kitchen scale. It'll be so worth it. So I am going to just mix this up a little bit with my whisk here so everything is moistened before I take it over to the KitchenAid. But before I take it over to the KitchenAid, I'm also going to measure out my other two ingredients, the egg yolk powder and the butter powder. And you'll notice I did not put these ingredients into the original mix, because if you do that, if you put anything into the original mix that has any fat in it at all, it will cause the batter not to whip up. And you have to do that first before you can add any of the fat powders or any other kind of fat. So I'm just gonna measure out these so they're all ready to throw in at the end of whipping. I'm gonna do 2 teaspoons of the yolk powder. And if you have whole egg powder, you could do 2 tablespoons of that. So either 2 teaspoons of yolk powder or 2 tablespoons of whole egg powder. And then I'm going to do a 1/4 cup of the butter powder, and that is 24 grams. And I'm just going to mix this up a little bit, get those clumps out of the yolk powder. And I'm just going to set this aside for when it's time to add it after the egg white mixture has whipped up. I'm going to start the mixer out on low and gradually increase the speed to high. That just avoids splattering. And once I get it to high, I'm going to let it mix for about 5 minutes. And that's going to get like a shaving cream type consistency. Depending on your mixer, it could take shorter or longer. So you're more going for the consistency than really the time of mixing. That's about the consistency I'm looking for. And now I'm gonna gently mix in the fat powders. Turn it on level 2. Just gonna make sure they get all mixed up, but not really whipped at this point. I want to make sure all of the powder got mixed in here. And now I'm just going to spread it into my prepared pan. My oven is all preheated, so we're all ready to go there. Then I never can decide if it's better to score the top or not score the top. It's hit or miss, seriously. Okay, that is ready to go in the oven, 325 for about 40 minutes. All right, look at how beautiful this looks. This bread recipe always turns out so pretty. That beautiful texture for the inside. I love it. I'm gonna pull it out of the pan and let it cool on the wire rack. And then once it's cool, I will give it a slice and show you the inside texture just so you can see the finished product. Bread is cool, and I'm gonna give it a slice here. And I do usually like just slicing up my whole loaf of bread at once, and then I don't have to get out my cutting board and my knife every time I need a slice or two. But you could do it whatever way you want. I do always get asked how I store the bread. And typically I will leave it on the counter, like, you know, wrapped up after it's completely cool for a day or two. And if there's any left at that point, then I transfer it to the fridge because it definitely keeps a lot longer in the fridge. It'll keep, you know, 5 or 6 days in the fridge, but only like 2 to 3 days on the counter. Just show you the inside texture here real quick. Got some nice big bubbles. You get those nice bubbles from both the butter powder and from the yolk powder, but I think the yolk powder is probably the thing that gives it the texture the most. And then the butter powder gives it some texture and then also really good flavor, but it just looks so perfect. And this bread, it passes the mush test. You don't want a bread that, you know, you press and then it bounces right back to the shape that it was. Like you could wash your car with it, because then when you chew it, it's like chewing up a sponge into a bunch of little pieces rather than, you know, having it like mush and kind of start dissolving in your mouth. So this definitely passes that mush test. So I have in my mind that I will put together a written recipe for frozen shredded butter recipe using the egg white bread mix. And then I'm thinking like some different kinds of rolls, maybe some pull apart rolls, just some different like basic recipes that you can make from the mix, just to have them all kind of together and on hand, and just like I said, to streamline things in the kitchen. Always looking for ways to just make this lifestyle a little bit simpler. So thank you so much for hanging out with me in the kitchen today. You can find links to recipes down in the description. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you again in the next one.